All right, guys, today we are going to talk about the Mexican-American War. This is Standard 2.2, and let's dive right into it. I know it's a Friday, at least for most of you when you're watching this, so you probably want to get this show on the road, so let's do it. Today we're going to talk about Manifest Destiny. We're still spreading westward. We're going to talk about how it impacts our relationship with other countries in the early to mid-1800s, okay? So, manifest destiny is this idea that we've been talking about that God wants America, specifically white America, to spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And we so far have done a pretty darn good job of making it happen. We have purchased the Louisiana Territory, which doubled the size of the United States. We have slowly spread out across it. And as we have, we find resources and raw materials that we then send back to the east that make us have an even more powerful industrial base. We're getting strong, we're getting rich, and we're like, see, this must be the blessing of God. Let's keep going west. Yes, there have been a couple road bumps. Like you see in the picture there, we've got the Native Americans that we have not dealt very, in a very savory way with, we'll say. And we're going to talk about one more issue that's going to we're going to run into in just a little bit. I'm going backwards. Oops. So there's a guy I need you to know. Okay, this guy is James K. Polk. And when we talk about the idea of actually accomplishing and finishing Manifest Destiny, this is the guy that should come to your mind. In fact, yes, Thomas Jefferson is important because he buys the Louisiana Territory, which allows us to spread west. Yes, you've also got Andrew Jackson, who forces the Native Americans out. But James K. Polk basically runs for office, and he says, if you vote for me, we, the Americans, will finish what we believe is our manifest destiny. Now, there's a problem. And that problem is that at that point, the United States map looks like this. You say, what's that big yellow thing there? Well, that's Texas. Texas used to be almost double the size it is now, and it included a lot of what is today the American Southwest. Well, how are we going to get that? How are we going to get that is a real question that we need to talk about. So you've probably heard of these guys before. Of course, we need to explore the Louisiana Territory, and pretty early on, Lewis and Clark are going to be the guys who go out, they explore it, they map it, they see what's there, and of course, Sacagawea there on the $1 coin is going to lead them. And it's weird that Lewis and Clark are like, they're these brave explorers, but they don't know where they're going, right? They need a helper who's a Native American helper to get out there. And as they do, as they move west, they claim the Oregon Territory. It's not part of the Louisiana Purchase, but we're like, there's nobody else out here. I guess we'll take it for the United States. But the Oregon Territory is going to become a little bit of a problem because actually the British have also been out there and the British have also claimed it for themselves. The good news is Oregon is pretty far away from Washington, D.C., and it's even further away from London, England. And so we're not about to go to war over this. We basically say, look, nobody's going to actually start building major cities there. So why don't we just show up there? We'll do some fur trading, some trapping, we'll do some farming, and there's really no reason for us to fight. Now, we still kind of have this idea in our head that we want to claim all the way up to the top part of Oregon at some point, but for now, we're willing to put up with it. When James K. Polk, though, runs for president in 1844, he says, if you vote for me, I'm going to complete Manifest Destiny. I'm going to make it happen. And he promises that we're going to get all the way up to this top line, which is the 54th parallel. If you remember your longitude and your latitude, this is the 54th parallel along the north of the equator. Okay. Remember, the higher up you go, the higher the numbers go. The equator is 0. This line right here is the 49th parallel. This is the 54th parallel. And Polk tries to make good on his promise. He basically goes to England and tries to negotiate it. He says, hey, why don't you just give us up to the 54th parallel? You see this heading here, 5440 or fight. 5440 is the specific numbers. So 54 degrees and 40 minutes, which I know minutes doesn't make a lot of sense, but the 54th parallel is what we're trying to get. The disagreement and the failure to negotiate it well almost leads us to a war, but then Polk kind of backs off and he's like, actually, maybe we don't want to go that far north. Why don't we just divide the Oregon Territory in half and will end at the 49th parallel, which is the current northern boundary you see here of the United States. Okay. And yes, Minnesota does have a little funky thing that sticks up into Canada. I can tell you about that, but that's kind of off topic. So this is pretty much going to set the northern boundary of the United States. That's pretty easy. We don't go to war. We come to an agreement. There we go. Now, that one's easy. Texas is a little bit harder. See, in the early part of the 1800s, Mexico has a problem, and that is that this chunk of the Mexican territory that today is the United States is really sparsely populated. In other words, there's a little village, and then there's lots and lots and lots of nothing, and then there's another little village. And they've got kind of bandits all throughout there. And so Mexico actually invites Americans to come into Texas to increase Texas population so that hopefully we can discourage these bandits. If you have more people and more guns, right, then maybe we can fight them off. And a lot of people, especially in the South, are like, yeah, let's go west. We can get more cotton there. We can have more slavery. And you say, why do they want more slavery? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, but it has to do with if the territory that they move out there is slave territory, and maybe someday it becomes American territory, that means more slave states and more slavery proponents or advocates in Congress. In other words, people to vote in favor of slavery. Okay, we'll get to that. So just kind of hold on. So a lot of people start to move out there. However, Mexico is like, oh, hold on. You guys are bringing in all kinds of slaves, and you white people like to enslave brown people? Mexicans are like, hold on, most of us are brown people. We don't really like the idea that you're going to enslave brown people. Why don't we just, get rid of slavery entirely? And the people who live in Texas, the Americans who have moved to Texas, basically say, it is my right to own another human being and take away their rights. Which, yeah, it's kind of crazy when you say it out loud. Basically, they're like, no, you're not going to take away our slaves. And so Texas fights to gain its independence from Mexico, and it wins. Technically, there is a little bit more to the Texan Revolution. I will give you that. But that is a major reason they're going to revolt. They don't want their slaves taken away. And Mexico's like, hey, you guys might claim yourself to be independent, but you're still us. You're just in revolt against Mexico. Okay, that's not okay. So because of that, Texas doesn't immediately become an American state because, number one, Mexico doesn't acknowledge that it's free. And number two, if we had another huge slave state to the south, that's going to cause controversy. Okay, think about the North and the South as a scales. Last time we talked about how the North and the South were kind of keeping this tariff issue balanced. And then when the West shows up, the West votes with the North and whoop, the South is outvoted. The tariff is passed. Well, now the South is like, you guys might want to get rid of slavery at some point. And so they would love to add in another slave state like Texas that would tip the scales in their balance. But the North is like, we want to keep it balanced. Okay, we don't want the South to overrule the North about slavery or about tariffs or about anything. Balance is important. Okay, this idea of balance is super, super important. So for 9 years, Texas is an independent country because we don't want to throw off this balance. And then it's our boy, James K. Polk. Remember he promised, vote for me and I'll finish Manifest Destiny? Well, he shows up and he's going to approve the annexation of Texas. But there's a little bit more to this story than just that. And hold on, we'll come back to that question, I believe. Okay. The problem becomes, what is Texas? Where does Texas end? You see, the United States claims that we go the United States or Texas goes all the way to this lower boundary here, which is the Rio Grande or the Rio Grande River. Mexico says, fine, you guys want to take Texas, that's fine, but Texas only goes to this river, which is the Nueces River. That's a difference of like half of Texas, right? So if we're right, Texas is twice as big as what Mexico says. And we can't agree on where the boundary ought to be. And so James K. Polk is like, well, we don't really want to declare a war. People don't like it when you just go bully other folks. So what can we do? Well, I know. Why don't we offer to buy that territory and California, right, from Mexico? Maybe that should say Texas and Mexican territory now that I'm looking at it. Um, he wants, basically what he wants is this territory all the way out to here. And Mexico's like, yo, that's half of our country. We're not going to give you half of our country. And Polk's like, I'll give you $15 million for it. And Mexico's like, no, we're not going to do that. Well, this is going to lead to a little bit of a debate. Should we go to war over this land? A couple things are going on. Okay, we'll talk about this in a little bit. But at this point, in the South, you've got a lot of people who are very pro states' rights. We talked about that last time, remember nullification. And the Democrats, the party of Thomas Jefferson, are all about states' rights. Okay, James Polk is a Democrat. Okay, so James K. Polk is going to listen probably to whichever part of the country is going to vote for him next. So how does this have any impact on the Mexican War? Well, it turns out that the North doesn't want to go to war. And part of the reason is if we take all that territory, it's kind of southern territory. It's south of the North is what I was going to say, but it's south. And so slavery might spread out there. And if all that land becomes pro-slavery states, then the North is going to be outweighed when it comes to slavery and when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to pretty much everything. And so the North is like, no, let's not go to war. The South is like, let's go to war. We want to take that land. We want slavery to spread because then we are going to have more power in Congress. We will never have to pay another stupid tariff again and we'll keep slavery forever. Well, James K. Polk, of course, is going to listen to the South because they're the ones who primarily vote for him. He's a Democrat. And so he doesn't want to go to war. That's not super popular. So he puts a bunch of troops right on the border between the North and the South. Let me back up. Let me show you what I'm talking about. He puts his troops in this dark green area between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. He knows that we claim that, but so does Mexico. It's the disputed territory. Well, if you're Mexico, how do you look at that when you look out there and there are troops right on the other side of the Rio Grande River? You're like, we are being invaded. We're a sovereign territory. We're not going to do that. And so the Mexicans fire on the Americans there on that border, and 11 Americans are killed. And James K. Polk is like, boy, that's very sad, but yes. So he goes to Congress and he says, America has been invaded by the Mexicans. We have to defend our rights. We have to defend our honor. We must go to war with Mexico. And Congress votes overwhelmingly to go to war. There are some people who don't, including a guy from Illinois who's a senator by this point by the name of Abraham, I think it's like Lincoln or something. I don't know. He says, there's more to the story than that. He doesn't want to go to war. So America fights Mexico, and the Mexican War goes very quickly. America penetrates Mexico all the way into Mexico City by 1848. And we could have actually added Mexico City. I love this picture. It just shows the march on the city. We could have added all of Mexico to the United States, but we don't. And I think it's worth pointing out why we don't. One of the things that America believes at this point is that basically, now hang on to this, I want to point this out because this is something you'll see all throughout American history, is that America believes itself, or at least the people at that point, believe that America is a white nation. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, okay? I'm saying that they look at these Mexicans and are like, yeah, we could take over your land, but what are we going to do with all the Mexicans? Like, we don't know what to do, okay? And so this is one of these things that I think we have to admit America, no, we shouldn't have taken over Mexico. Okay, don't get me wrong. But I think we need to realize that the United States has had kind of a very ethnocentric self-identity. We've had this idea that we are this. And when that's challenged, when we become a multicultural society, it's kind of hard for us to let go of that idea sometimes. And so some of these ideas that are being brought up about, are we good at allowing people who aren't white to take positions of power and all that kind of thing? I think there's an argument to be made. And I just want to point that out, okay? Because we could have taken Mexico and we're like, I don't know. So we're going to force a treaty on Mexico. And the treaty is going to do four things. First of all, it's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And it says this. Number one, The southern boundary of Texas is what we say it is. It's the Rio Grande River. Number two, we're going to take all of the land of not only Texas, but also California, which includes all that territory includes California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, all the way up into parts of Colorado and Wyoming. It's kind of massive. And here's the kicker. We're only going to give them $15 million, which is what we offered them before this. Guys, this is like if I went to a little kid down the street and I said, I will buy your bike for $25. And he says, no. And so I kick him and I punch him and I, just leave him, bleeding in the street. And I take his bike and I throw $25 at him on the way. Okay. This is kind of a wacky deal. This is what we offered him before. We just shot a bunch of people in between and, forced him to do this. By the way, when you say we annex this, the word annex might be new for some of you. It just means we're going to add new land. If you don't know that one, you might want to type it in your notes. Guys, at this point, we started this chapter just kind of being this brown territory here, and then we add in the Louisiana territory. Actually, I sort of went out of order here. We're going to add Texas first, and then the Oregon territory, and now we've added Mexico. Here's what I want to point out. By 1848, the United States will have completed Manifest Destiny because we stretch from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. By the way, one little last tidbit I want to give you. You see this Gadsden Purchase down here? A couple years after the Mexican cession finishes, after we add the land from Mexico, we say, man, we got a problem because some of this territory here is sort of rocky, and we'd like to build some trains from California through Texas. There's some really good land that's flat down here. So we go to Mexico and we're like, Mexico, would you sell us that land? And Mexico says, well, it's just kind of desert. Yeah, we'll sell it to you for, let's think, what should we, $15 million, which is kind of amusing. It's almost like they're sticking it to us because we threw $15 million at them for all of this. And they're like, for a little bit of desert, we're going to charge you the same amount. Okay. It's going to continue to impact our relationship with Mexico for a long, long time. In fact, no American president visits Mexico for 100 years after this in a formal capacity. And today, I just want to point out, I'm not justifying anything, but I think we would agree that we kind of took this through sort of maybe not above board means. So maybe some of the, and I don't want to, say too much here, but maybe some of the folks who are coming into the United States illegally are like, yeah, well, you know what? You took it from us first illegally. So that doesn't justify things. I know illegal immigration is a problem, but it's a little wrinkle that maybe is worth considering. Okay. All right. One last tidbit to give you, and it is sort of another idea, but I'm gonna throw it here anyway. I want you to think really quickly about the world. And I know it's a separate idea. It's got to go somewhere in this chapter, and this is it. So just kind of take a brain break, maybe pause this and come back in a couple seconds. If you look at these two halves of the world, of course, we call these hemispheres. We've got the Western Hemisphere where we live. We have the Eastern Hemisphere where the rest of the world is. And it's right around this time when we complete Manifest Destiny, we say we don't really want to compete with anybody in Europe over our half of the world. And so on top of that, Napoleon, by this point, has been defeated back in Europe. And you've got all these European kings and queens who are taking back the throne now that Napoleon's gone and he's locked up and he's on an island. And a lot of these guys are like, you know what? Before Napoleon showed up, we were colonizing the Western Hemisphere. Why don't we do some more of that? And Britain in particular is like, no, we got really strong. We don't want to have to compete with you guys. So our interest and Britain's interest align. And so Britain contacts our president, who is a guy by the name of James Monroe at this point. And they say, you don't really want anybody colonizing in your backyard. So why don't you just issue a statement? We're going to call this statement the Monroe Doctrine, where basically James Monroe teaches people, okay, a doctrine is just a teaching. He says, Europe, don't come over here to this half of the world anymore. No longer come over to the Western Hemisphere. You guys stay on your side. We'll stay on ours. Now, we're still kind of weak. We don't really have a strong Navy. England is going to have to help us out, but they're more than interested in doing it because they don't want to compete with Spain. So again, the idea is Europe, you stay over here. We will stay over here. Stop coming over here to colonize us. That's the Monroe Doctrine. And I know, it's kind of weird. I just threw it at you. All right. Guys, that's it for today. I know this is a little bit long, but we're done.